Oh, finally we made it. End of 2020. I think we got, what do we got here? 15 hours until 2021 can roll in. Change is coming. It's not going to come right away, but I wanted to take, I don't know how long this video is going to be. 2020 has been a weird year, but I'm just kind of going to do a 2020 wrapped in the world of sports. There was a lot that happened this year, and some of it was good, some of it was bad. There were moments that stood out, records were broken, movements were made. So we're just going to take a quick stroll down memory lane to what was the world's longest year of 2020. So before the sporting world shut down, we did have some things happen. Some of them were good, some of them were bad. But we can look back to January 13th to start off with when LSU won the college football championship against they're both called the Tigers. It was a really confusing game for the announcers. But Joe Burrow led LSU to a championship there, and eventually he would go on to be drafted first overall by the Cincinnati Bengals. Sticking with football, Patrick Mahomes led the Kansas City Chiefs to a Super Bowl this year, snapping a 50-year Super Bowl drought for that city. It was a big win. They were behind in the fourth quarter. He was able to come back. I think there was like two or three rushing touchdowns he was involved in. He was great at the end of that game, and they would go on to win the Super Bowl. Switching over to sports, remember the Houston Astros scandal? Yeah, that happened this year. They were found out, I believe it was middle of January, early February, to have cheated to win their World Series. And then a whole investigation began. None of the players were fined. It was only management. And it was just a huge scandal that rocked the sporting world. We did lose a sports icon this year in Kobe Bryant. He unfortunately passed away with his daughter in a helicopter crash. This one rocked the sports world. It was reflected in every sport with people paying homage to him. Football players had it on cleats, hockey sticks on tape. It was everywhere, man, and it rocked the sporting world. I can't stress that enough. He wasn't just an athlete; he was an icon across the world, and he was a symbol of hope and change. And it's unfortunate we lost him so early. Everything seemed to be having momentum in sports. We were all going well. There was a couple of rumorings and rumblings going on that coronavirus was going to affect some of these games, but it hadn't happened yet. And then Rudy Gobert tested positive. That game was suspended, and the same night the NBA suspended their season, which kind of led to everybody going, "Oh, this is not good. This is not good at all." And then all of a sudden, sports were yanked away from us within a week. This led to March Madness being canceled. The Olympics were canceled. The Euro Cup was canceled. That's just three of the bigger events that were going to happen this year, and everything just kind of froze. Nobody knew what to do, and it was a really weird time to be a sports fan. In-person gatherings weren't allowed. People were isolating, trying to stay away from each other to stop the spread of the virus. There was really no idea of a time frame of a return, but events still had to happen, and that's where we led to the virtual movement. The WNBA hosted a virtual draft, and then other leagues followed. The NFL did their draft virtually, NBA did their draft virtually, NHL did their draft virtually. All these leagues did their stuff virtually. And it wasn't just the drafts. Players started interacting online. We saw Twitch streams, we saw Q&As online, Instagrams, Zoom interviews, and that players really took this time to reach out to their fans and let them know they were still there. So that was pretty cool to see. We were waiting and waiting and waiting. I'm sure everybody had that phase where they were just watching Korean baseball on Sportsnet and reruns of old Leafs Sens games on there. People didn't really know what to do. Everyone was resorting to online gaming or whatever you could do to keep busy, but sports were gone. They weren't there, just reruns. So we were waiting for an announcement, and then it slowly started to leak out. Oh, we could do this, we could do that, and it was actually the NWSL that led the way, the National Women's Soccer League, and they came back in a bubble format, and it worked. And then the MLS announced their return to play, and then we started to hear more things like, "Hey, this bubble can work. This can work. This can work." The bubble play was announced. The NBA came back in a bubble. The NHL came back in a bubble. My dog's here. The MLS had their return to play or return to tournament, whatever they called it, return to play tournament. Everybody was in a bubble. The WNBA, the NWHL is going to still be in a bubble in 2021. And there was hope again. We were able to come back in. But where were these bubbles going to be? There was a whole process. It ended up being they were able to find locations for these bubbles. Testing protocols came in, and eventually we were able to tip off, drop the puck, have a kickoff. It was great to see. So we got sports back, and then a social justice movement started. And social justice, it's bigger than sports. If it had happened because of that, I think everybody would have understood. But there were riots in Milwaukee. Milwaukee Bucks didn't want to play their game because they didn't feel it was right. And then that led to the NBA as a whole saying, no, we're going on pause because we want to figure this out and have a voice as players. So they had a whole meeting. They decided to play. They got some agreements from the NBA. The NHL didn't do as a good a job, but they did something. But perhaps the biggest movement we saw was in NASCAR, where Bubba Wallace went through that whole thing where he apparently found a noose in his, I guess you could call it his pit, and the whole NASCAR community was behind him. It was a really powerful image to see as he walked down the track and everybody was behind him united. It was really, really cool. Another one that stood out, this was in tennis. I don't know too much about tennis, but Naomi Osaka, she won the US Open. And as she said it, she was wearing all the names of all these victims that have been shot by police or police brutality. And she was like, say their names, say their names. So that was really powerful as well. So we did get some good out of sports this year. We could see that athletes can use their voice to change things, and change is happening. It's not perfect yet, but it is coming, and it is happening with the voices of our athletes. Return to play was not smooth for everybody. The MLB, they went through a whole thing. Their players, they didn't want to play a full season, so they said, okay, we'll play 62 games, but we want to be paid for this. And the owners were like, well, you're only playing this, or we're only paying you for that. So that actually led to a latent start in the MLB season, and they ended up figuring it out. Not everybody could play in their home arenas. The Jays were not able to play in Toronto, so they had to go and play in Buffalo. So their whole season was pretty much on the road. But the MLB did figure it out. They did get underway, and we did see baseball on TV. The only sport everybody was wondering about, and the one that really moves the needle, was the NFL. And it was kind of down to the wire at this point if fans would be allowed in the building. It didn't look good, and then an announcement came out they would start their season with no fans in the building. They have now moved on to some fans with limited seating and all that stuff, and people spread out. And so the NFL did come back, but no fans in the building. The bubble plays continued, playoffs started, and we eventually saw the Lightning win the Stanley Cup. The Lakers won, the Columbus Crew won the MLS Cup. But golf hadn't come back yet. It had been back, but everyone wanted to see, okay, what's going on with the Masters? Well, the Masters have been moved to November. And it was a weird tournament because the Masters is usually in April. This year it was in November. Different greens, different play style because of the weather. They were teeing off on 1 and 10 because of the daylight. Obviously, you use daylight later on in the year. And Dustin Johnson won that one. He completely lapped the field in that tournament. And it was actually really cool to see the Masters on TV in November. Women in sports this year had a huge year. The NWHL, the National Women's Hockey League, they expanded into Toronto, the Toronto Six. We did an interview with their goalie. Make sure you check that out. The NWSL, they led the way. They were the first ones in the bubble and underway playing. And the WNBA, when they were in their bubble, they had record-breaking numbers. So women in sports, it's coming. We still need to work hard, though, to get these ladies on TV and eyes on the product. But they had a huge year in terms of progress. These were just a couple things I could think of off the top of my head. I don't want to drag this on too long because do we really want to relive 2022 too much? A couple other things I can think of is who can forget the whole boxing kind of blowing back up thing with the celebrity boxing and Jake Paul and all that stuff. I don't think anybody really wants to remember that though, even though it was pretty cool. But let me know your favorite sports moments of 2020. Drop them down below, good or bad. They don't have to be, perfect or something that reflected with you this year. Happy New Year, everybody. We will see you soon. Thanks for the support this year.